Hello and welcome to the Small Business Guide to Cybersecurity Masterclass, supported by our fabulous partners, BizCover. We're coming to you live from the International Towers at Barangaroo. I'm your host, Cec Busby, editor of Kochie's Business Builders, and I'm excited to be with you going through the essentials of cybersecurity today. But before we dive into it, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And their enduring connection to this land reminds us of the importance of community, collaboration and protection, principles that actually resonate particularly well with our topic today. So, in a constantly changing digital landscape, small businesses find themselves at the front line of the cyber battlefield. The need for a strong cybersecurity response has never been greater, and that's why we've gathered here today with two fantastic experts to help us guide us through this critical terrain. So I'd like to introduce Luke Achterstraat. Luke is the CEO of the Council of Small Business Organisations Australia, also known as COSBOA, and is a driving force behind the Cyber Wardens digital safety program. Luke's expertise in cyber safety advocacy has been instrumental in safeguarding small businesses across the nation. And joining him is Jane Mason, the Head of Product, Channels and Risk at BizCover. Jane is a leading figure in the world of cyber insurance, and Jane has some fantastic insights and knowledge in helping protect businesses against cyber threats. So thank you for joining us. Okay, now let's dive in. I think my first question is probably going to be something to do with the stats that we're seeing at the moment around cybersecurity. So the Australian Cybersecurity Centre says that according to the results of a recent survey, small businesses report a cybersecurity incident every 10 minutes. And they also estimate that the annual loss to small business alone is $300 million a year, $1 billion when you include big business as well. 62% of small businesses have experienced a cybersecurity incident, and 1 in 5 small business owners have never heard of phishing, which is astonishing considering how many are victims of phishing attacks. So Luke, it seems to me that this is a pretty massive issue for business owners of all size. What needs to be done? Obviously there's an education piece that's missing.
Thanks so much, Seth. It's great to be here. Look, the first thing to say is we really need to understand that this is a real and present danger for small businesses. You know, there's over 2 million small businesses in Australia. Now, a lot of those businesses might be mum and dad shops that have mortgaged a house to stay in business. So there's really a lot at stake. So if we're talking about, 43% of small businesses, as victims, potential victims of a cyber attack, that's about 1 million businesses in Australia. Who are vulnerable to that. So it really starts with talking to the small business community and saying, here are the issues at play, here are the threats, but also saying to them, look, things can be done to prevent these attacks. There are simple things we can do around password management, about multi-factor authentication, and that's really what our Cyber Wardens program is about shining a light on those tips and tricks that small business owners can use. You don't have to be an IT guru. I'm certainly not an IT guru, but it's about that self-awareness to say, as a small business owner, before you leave your store, you lock up your safe to keep your cash safe, don't you? Similarly, you should lock down your devices and make sure your passwords are secure. So it's about bringing forward that security conversation into the digital age, and that's what we're trying to do with Cyber Wardens. Yeah,
it's actually a really great program helping to facilitate business owners to get that information they need to be more secure. So what are some of the most common cyber threats that you see facing small business owners today? That would be to both of you, because you would see it from the end product where you're trying to help people out of this terrible issue, and you see it from the front line when you're talking to the business owners on the day-to-day.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Cec. And you mentioned phishing, spear phishing as well as a concept that's becoming more and more common. A quick example that really elucidates how simple a lot of these sort of hackers are. When you update your out of office response on your email, that can inadvertently give away information to a potential scammer to actually have a pretty good oversight of where you are and what you're doing. So that's a real threat that we're seeing, and it's not uncommon for potential clients or small businesses to receive fake invoices sent out to their clients. So if someone calls you and says, hey, please pay this invoice, and something doesn't seem quite right, well, you've got to have your guard up in that front. So certainly the impersonations, the scams, as well as phishing is becoming quite common.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'd agree with that. I think there was a report that went out recently by MyOb, and I think they said phishing was the #1 risk to small businesses. And it certainly is what we're seeing on the claims end. So we obviously get the claims when things do go wrong. And I actually had a quick look at some of the claims that were reported to us over a 2-month period before coming here. And phishing or social engineering claims are actually about 40% of all claims that we saw. So it really, really is it's a really big risk to small businesses. We're also seeing ransomware is on the rise. So ransomware, for anyone who isn't aware, it's a type of virus or malware that enters your system and completely locks your system. And then, just like a pirate, they ask for a ransom in order to give your data back or unlock your system. So that's certainly on the rise, and general malware and viruses, and also some vulnerability attacks. So patch management, updates, doing updates on your computer, so important to make sure that you don't have any vulnerabilities in there. They're probably what we're mainly seeing on the claims front.
So easy to just hit that ignore or
it
remind me
is.
later. People just do that all the time,
I've certainly
they
been
don't really
guilty of it.
realise it's giving access potentially to cyber criminals, because there's updates for a reason, because vulnerabilities have been discovered.
Absolutely. I mean, when you think about these, cyber criminals actually just sit there and look for vulnerabilities or put holes in some of the most widespread used software. It's like a game of Tom and Jerry cat and mouse or so. Then the software companies look to plug that or patch that. And as you quite rightly say, when we don't update our computers, we're leaving ourselves vulnerable.
And oftentimes it can also not just be the business owner, it may be an employee who inadvertently has put the business at risk by not updating stuff. And I think even that big hack that happened on the weekend was because of with MGM.
Okay.
Shut down the entire casino. People were locked out of floors in the hotel. The slot machines all stopped running. Can you imagine the catastrophic amount of business loss?
I think that's right. And if you're a small business owner, it's a 95% chance that hackers or scammers will target your employees. So this is really a team game we're playing. It's great for individual business owners to be aware of those risks, be it phishing or otherwise malware, as Jane said, but ensuring that your team has that confidence and the tools and the tips that I mentioned in terms of what Cyber Wardens offers. The best way to protect your team is to educate your entire team. Make sure you've got that sort of Praetorian guard around your business because there is some human error at play here. People sharing passwords. We've potentially all been guilty of that at times, where it's postponing system updates or otherwise, but certainly the more that your team can share that journey, I think is great for their safety moving forward. Yeah,
and also not using the same password on everything. Then they get one thing, they've got your whole life.
That's right.
That they can get access to.
Absolutely.
It's incredible. So what do you think are some key practices that businesses should put into place to ensure that, they can be less at risk, regardless of what industry they're in or the size of the business?
Look, a range of things. Multi-factor authentication is definitely a big one. So making sure that there's multiple steps for you to verify who's using your system. Certainly, password complexity is another one. A lot of people sort of maybe add a lowercase or an uppercase, but certainly the longer your password is, the more secure it is. We're talking about people who have got a lot of time on their hands potentially in terms of wanting to cause a cyber attack. So some of those basic sort of system updates as well that Jane mentioned. So making sure, the latest antivirus software is available, making sure you're keeping up to date with that. And as I said, being quite clever about not necessarily, giving away your whereabouts, not necessarily giving away, your clientele in the way in which you communicate online. So just being very secure about that and treating your customers' data with the respect that it deserves.
Yeah. Don't say you're on holiday in Fiji and you're out of office. Then the hackers are like, woo, 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 let's go there now. Let's try and get in.
Yeah, look, I'd agree with that. I'd say my top few would be education. As Luke said, particularly around phishing, education has been proved to be the best defence against social engineering, so that manipulation, tricking people into dissolving sensitive information. For me, backups. Backups are huge. And we see it on the claims when it comes to claims time really often. We had 2 ransomware claims recently, and in both situations, the insured had really good backup procedures, and they were able to keep operating off their backup and did not have to pay the ransom.
Yeah,
so
important.
really, really important. Really good backup procedures. I would say multi-factor authentication, of course, and as we said, patch management and updates. They'd probably be the top.
So Jane,
Yeah, great.
you know, we'd insure our equipment for our business, we'd insure the premises, you know, yet so many businesses fail to actually think about cyber security and in cyber liability insurance, when that's something that can be really critical in helping your business get through something if they do get attacked. Why do you think that is?
It's a great question, Cec. I mean, we at BizCover, we are the number one online insurer for small businesses. We have over 200,000 customers. We did a survey of our customers. We called it our Bravery Index. And in the survey, we asked them what they thought were the most significant risks to their business. And believe it or not, cyber was called out as what small businesses believe to be the number one risk to their business. But then you have a look at how many are actually protecting themselves with a cyber liability insurance, and it's very minimal. I would say there's a couple of reasons for that. I think the media do sensationalise and report the large losses of the Optus and the Medibanks, but it's not as sexy to report the $40,000 loss that a small business has. But a small business can be put out of, they can go out of business as a result of that.
Down.
So I think that's probably one of it. Awareness is probably a key part of that. I would also say that access is difficult. Traditionally, access to insurance has been very difficult. Proposal forms are 50 pages long, questions are difficult. The average person will find it very, very hard. So I think it's really important what people like COSBOA are doing in terms of educating small businesses. And I will give the shameless plug to BizCover here. I mean, we really work hard to make sure the questions and the process of accessing insurance is customised to a small business. We make it easy, we make it simple. In the case of cyber, we only have 10 cyber-specific questions, and we really try and make them relevant and appropriate to SMEs.
Yeah, otherwise that could be a real turn-off.
Absolutely.
The harder the process is to get something, the less likely people are to take it up.
And if I can just build on that, Cec, COSBOA has the same view. So our Small Business Perspectives report also found that cyber risk was the number one material risk facing small businesses at the moment. So it is a little bit ironic that a small business might insure themselves against flood or fire when there's actually a much greater chance of a cyber threat. So another piece around Cyber Wardens is giving people that conversation tool, that vernacular of what I'm actually talking about here, and we hope that will give them the awareness and then the confidence to potentially shop around and consider an insurance product, because a $50,000 loss in cash holdings, that can be business terminal for a lot of small businesses. So it's money well spent, but certainly there's a lot we can do internally without necessarily the use of big IT departments to reduce some of that risk, and that will hopefully flow through into the pricing of products on the market.
Yeah. So in your opinion, how crucial is employee training then?
Totally crucial. It is probably the number one key, really. It's about building that critical mass of understanding within the organisation, and you really need to cover all bases. So if you've got a team of 15, giving 10 of them the training and 5 of them not, you're still just as vulnerable potentially as you were at the beginning of the day. So you really need to make sure that there's no chinks in the armour, and it's about instilling that culture, I think, within the organisation as well. The way you talk about your customer data, the way you handle passwords, the way you handle sensitive information. A successful small business should really be pretty world class in a lot of those areas, and that's a big part of the privacy conversation as well as the cyber conversation.
So I guess this is for both of you. Like, online thieves are using things like phishing to get access to secure data for businesses, and employees are logging into accounts and might not have that password security, the multi-factor authentication, etc. So for a business owner, how important is it for them to have a policy in place, an actual cyber security policy, so that these things don't happen?
Do you want to take that?
Sure. Look, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, the obvious answer is it's very, very important. But when you think about it practically, a lot of SMEs, they don't have the financial or human resources to develop cybersecurity manuals or to pay an expert to develop a cybersecurity manual for them. So I think it's really important to look at this down the lens of what is actually realistic or appropriate for SMEs. So once again, I think that's why what COSBOA is doing is so important in terms of providing information to SMEs that is accessible, that is easy to understand, and that is easy to implement. So I think it's extremely important, and the question is how people go about accessing or getting access to that information.
And so potentially from the Cyber Wardens perspective then, what should businesses looking to be assessed in terms of risk?
They should be looking to assess internal and external risk. So I think just to build on Jane's comments about the response plan, I mean, the reality is, attacks will happen. Some attacks are not preventable, but having even a basic response plan where your team are equipped with, contacting your bank, contacting your potentially insurance company, contacting relevant cyber agencies, contacting your accountant, the quicker that you can bring those stakeholders on board and make them aware of a potential attack is really critical. And it might sound silly, but even having a physical copy of your response plan as well is obviously quite critical if you're in a situation where you might get locked out. So look, in terms of that risk radar that you mentioned, Cec, one of the things that Cyber Wardens is about is having a pretty broad view of that and really wanting to keep up with what a lot of these bad actors are doing as well. So a lot of scammers, a lot of hackers, like the rest of us, are getting used to ChatGPT using artificial intelligence. So there's some really new, interesting and perverse games being played out there. So it's about having that awareness and just looking for things that might not sort of look or feel right. So, changes, the classic is with an invoice that comes in and, the bank details been changed slightly, or the font's changed. Do you think, well, that's not necessarily the right invoice that I've received? So the risk can be that, but it can be much more complicated than that. But having that sort of cyber safety mindset, that's what Cyber Wardens is about.
And so you were speaking about that constantly evolving landscape. So from an insurance perspective, how difficult is it to keep up with that kind of thing?
The goalposts are certainly always moving when it comes to cyber. 10 years ago, it was very much a conversation was around data. It was data loss and data breach. And now the conversation has shifted to social engineering and ransomware. So it is certainly always evolving. And I think it's one of the reasons having an incident response plan, which does involve insurance in place, is absolutely critical. I think most people would not know what to do if they went into work tomorrow morning and turned on their computer and there was a ransomware attack or other cyber incident. What would you do? I think most people would probably try and get online and call an IT expert or a cyber expert, and that wastes time and it gets very costly. I think one of the things that insurance does, which I think is one of the best things that is included in insurance product, is they have an incident response service. So there's a 24-hour hotline that people can call, and there's a team of experts that can help guide you through how that immediate response, which I think is really, really important. If you have IT consultants that you already work with, they can work with them and guide them through it. Those costs can be recoverable under an insurance policy. So in terms of that immediate response and being able to address and respond to the ever-changing threats, I think it's very, very important to have cyber insurance as part of your broader incident response plan, and then also obviously as part of your broader recovery plan. How will you recover once there is an incident?
Yeah, because there's reputational damage as well, isn't there? So how do you recover from that reputational damage?
Yeah, well, it can be business terminal, as I say, for a small business. And one of the things we're trying to talk about with Cyber Wardens is having various tiers of accreditation. So, making sure that that's updated over time. It's 30 minutes to do Cyber Wardens and it's free. So it's the best half an hour you'll ever spend to potentially protect your business from a $50,000 loss, which is the average cost of a cyber attack. So keeping up to date with those trends and keeping those tips and tricks current, I think is a key element of what we're trying to do at Cyber Wardens.
Yeah, so can you break that down for me? You said 30 minutes to learn how to protect your business. What kind of things will business owners be learning in the Cyber Wardens program?
Yeah, so it's some guiding principles about cybersecurity. So that's in terms of password management, things like multi-factor authentication, but being aware aware of the ransomware attacks that Jane's talking about, the various sort of bad actors that are out there. So really giving small business owners, I suppose, the confidence to not feel overwhelmed, to understand that, you know, they're not necessarily an IT wizard or an IT guru, but they can have that self-awareness. And, you know, throughout COVID, small businesses have really done it pretty tough. They've really proved their resilience. Small businesses are great at adapting and finding new ways to delight their customers. So certainly when it comes to mitigating risk, it's not necessarily their first rodeo, but it's bringing them into that digital world, into that cyber realm, and saying, you know, here are 3 or 4 or 5, you know, practical things we can do, and institute that within the organisation. So if it's as basic as updating systems and making sure your devices are safe and closed down at the end of the day, well, you know, you've done a great thing, and that's what Cyber Wardens is about.
So what do you think are the misconceptions around cybersecurity and implementing cybersecurity? Is maybe it's too hard? Is that one of them?
Certainly. I think there is a it won't happen to me mentality for sure. So I think that is part of it. And let's face it, it is not easy. Not everybody knows what firewall means, and but I think to implement basic cybersecurity procedures is becoming easier than ever. So it's inbuilt in a lot of software and a lot of applications. Luke had spoken about multi-factor authentication, which is essentially 2 forms of security or identity before you can get into an application. And you know, that is built into the majority of software these days and major application these days.
Pretty much everything these days is suddenly popping up with the message going, do you want to implement multi-factor authentication? And you're like, groan, yes.
So I think that's, and I think, so I think it's where do I start? What do I do? And I think that's the difficulty. And programs like COSBOA have, I think, really helps. The process of applying for insurance helps because the questions that are in proposal forms are designed around the losses that are happening.
Yeah, so it will show
helps
you
to guide
the risk.
Exactly.
It'll be like, oh, I don't have that.
Exactly. It can help guide you as to where you should be putting your attention. And as a small business owner, you know, you need to be very targeted with where you put your attention and your time.
So the worst has happened. There's been a cybersecurity attack. There's been the reputational damage. Now there's business interruption. Is that one of the ways that your insurance could help?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, there's the incident response service, and that's that. And when you have the immediate threat, you know, the fire's coming to the house, and you know, once the house isn't burning down, we then need to look at, okay, what is the extent of the damage, and how can we recover? And there's a number of things where insurance will step in there. So insurance can actually help you. We call them, you know, IT forensic services. So we'll go in and we'll have a look and we'll identify what was the cause of the cyber incident. For example, if it's malware, we'll work to actually clear your system of the malware so you're up and ready to go. You mentioned reputational costs, damage. Most cyber policies include costs for PR firms to manage some of this reputational loss. Business interruption is a big one. Often with cyber incidents, with cyber incidents, there's people can't operate. And so similar with, you know, you might have with a flood or something like that, you have business interruption costs. So most cyber policies will cover you for your net loss of profit and also increased costs of working. There is also, which I love, a lot of policies have post-breach support. So they can help with training with staff and they can help with developing manuals as well. And of course, there's the costs of helping you recover, restoring data that might have been lost. And of course, there is covering you for your defence costs and damages in the event that there is a legal liability. And also legal advice around, is there a legal obligation for me to notify people of a data breach, and also helping to cover the costs of the notification. So what is included in most insurance policies is aimed at really assisting you from, you know, the date of the incident, stopping the incident, and also fully recovering from the incident.
Yeah, and that personal data element, so many businesses, small businesses these days do have customer data in their systems, so it is essential to be protecting that. We've got a few questions from our audience, which I might jump into before they get too long, and I keep going with all my questions. We have a question from Rosalind to Jane, and she is asking, are hackers faking technology update messages? I wonder the best way to access updates that are legitimate. I'm not sure how that's in your purview, Jane. Any advice you have there?
Look, I will say my background is in cyber underwriting. I'm not a cyber expert, a cyber security expert. So, look, I think it's fair to say that hackers are faking everything. Would you agree,
Yeah,
Luke?
100%. Yeah.
So, look, I think there are certainly ways to... most reputable companies will have ways of updating and putting their updates forward to you that which will be easily linked back to that company or their systems. So I think it's important to take note of where the update has come from, the email address these things come from. Yeah. But yes, absolutely, they'd certainly be faking everything.
Put auto update on your computer.
Yes, there you go.
It might just do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
You won't have to see
it's
those
messages. It's a great
messages.
question though, because clearly the question is thinking about the next steps ahead, and scammers and hackers using artificial intelligence or mimicking certain behaviours. So I think it's a really interesting question. And something as basic as just powering down your laptop, I'm very guilty of not doing that. But a lot of updates actually won't occur naturally through the system if your computer's not shut down. So even things as basic as that can often get you out of jail.
I've got a question for you, Luke, and it is from Deborah. She's saying, is having files on OneDrive enough of a backup?
Look, certainly the use of the cloud is a very smart thing to do. So whether that's OneDrive or whether that's using other applications
Google,
like
Google
whatever. Drive or Box or
Box,
Dropbox, Box.net. Look, certainly I think that's better than nothing would be the answer there to Deborah. So looking to really, I think instilling that culture where a lot of your files are just automatically backed up into the cloud. I mean, back to Jane's point earlier, the sort of business interruption piece. If you've got your essential data on the cloud, well, actually you can somewhat carry on business or at least have access to very important files to deal with your response to a potential cyber attack. So certainly, Deborah, use the cloud as much as you can. Maybe think about having multiple uses of the cloud. It's really sort of an individual preference on that front, but certainly the right thing to be asking.
Another one for you, Luke, from Emma. She's asking, how do they currently use IA for cyber attacks?
AI?
Yeah.
Look, possibly really subtle ways. So in terms of just making the language a little bit more, I suppose, familiar to a potential cyber victim. So if you think about the classic, what's the classic stereotype? You get the email from a person from overseas saying, congratulations, you've won this prize, and I wanted to, and you can just smell it a mile away. It's complete hogwash, right? But the use of AI and regenerative AI in terms of making communication and text more, I guess, believable and more realistic, that's quite a useful tool for university students to really help them with their essays. But for a potential hacker, they're potentially tricking you with better language that will resonate with you and might seem more real.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there, because people think about phishing and think of, the Nigerian email hacks and stuff, but they don't really think of that business compromise where someone is going in and they're maybe pretending to be, the payroll officer going, with blah, 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 and then suddenly you're sending your salaries to a random account because you've got a fake email from the CEO saying we've changed our business email or our business whatever,
or you
banking
might,
account.
Click on an erroneous link that's come from Australia Post or the Australian Taxation Office, and the use of AI by these people, by these bad actors, might make that email seem quite credible. The logo might look quite good. The language they use might sound like the language the ATO would use. So it's quite a threat. And again, you need to have your awareness shield up in that scenario.
One thing I would like to touch base with you about is one of the things that I found interesting when I was looking into the whole cyber insurance stuff was the forensic element. So you can actually really pinpoint how someone's got access to your information. I think that's something that's pretty fascinating, because you might have been breached, but how do you know how you were breached?
Absolutely, and that's one of the services that is provided under insurance policy, and it's really important to understand where are the weaknesses. So it's a way of helping to strengthen your business, after an attack. So obviously you can try and prevent the same thing happening again. And some insurance companies are doing some pretty cool stuff now as well. They're doing vulnerability testing of their insureds prior, before there is a loss, and notifying people, doing searches on the dark web to see if there's any dark web activity, and notifying people and guiding them as what to do, how to strengthen their cybersecurity even before a loss happens.
Another thing I'd want to talk about is, that interconnectivity, because it's not just about what you're doing on your computer or how you've got your payroll. So many things people use, tap and go, they're using FPOS machines, they're collecting payments all different ways, information's getting updated all different ways. Is there something specific that people should be focusing on to make sure that their interconnected devices aren't vulnerable to attack?
Yeah, it's probably about having sort of unique passwords across different platforms as well. So as you mentioned before, Cec, the classic issue of sort of having one password for your devices, we don't want to see that happening. I think utilising the cloud across various devices can give you some good peace of mind as well. So if you're working on iPhone, iPad, laptop, sort of having that synchronisation can just be really good for your sort of peace of mind, and certainly those system updates need to be consistent. So if you're operating across various devices, if there's not consistency of your shield, then you might be quite vulnerable. It's interesting you raise sort of tap and go, and it is interesting to think about every day how often we do have a digital interaction. And again, with Cyber Wardens, a part of the thinking of the program is to get people to be mindful of that. Every time you swipe your credit card, every time you tap and go, you are actually interacting in the digital economy, and we need to be mindful of that. And on the other side of the coin, small businesses need to be mindful of that too. So one of the things the government's looking to do at the moment is reviewing the Privacy Act. So that means small business owners will have a greater responsibility and to take care of their clients' data. So we actually have a responsibility as small business owners, as well as being victims of potential threats as well.
And obviously, a cyber incident can be so costly to a business because of the business interruption and the amount of trade they might be losing. But also with that privacy element, there's fines now, and businesses are liable. So I don't know if it does, but does the cybersecurity insurance cover that kind of thing or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So most will. Obviously, everything turns on the facts and circumstances of an individual claim. But yes, it is
this
a firm.
Is just
it
advice,
is, yes.
general advice.
General advice.
There's nothing that Jane is saying that you can then hold her down and ransom her to. It's just some general advice here.
No, but you are right. It is affirmative cover under most policies. So there can be obligations to notify people. It's usually based on whether there is a likelihood of serious harm, those notification obligations can be very expensive. And there can be other services that you may have to provide depending on the nature and how extensive the data breach is around credit monitoring services, for example, to protect people in the event that their identity has been stolen. And all of those are covered under, can be covered under an insurance policy, yes.
It can be.
Can be.
So I have another question here. This is to both of you, and it's from Sita, and I'm not sure if Sita's he, she, they, but Sita is asking, what are the ways to protect ourselves from cybersecurity threats? Well, that's a very big question, Sita. And what are the steps to be taken after a cybersecurity attack?
I'll give a quick answer to that, Sita. The answer is do the Cyber Wardens program and get your entire team to do the Cyber Wardens program. I mean, I'm being a bit facetious, but really, the federal government has supported COSBOA on this journey. They understand that cyber threats, cyber risks are real. The number one risk to small business, as Jane has confirmed for me. So we need to get serious about it. We need to treat it like you would. People have got fire wardens in their teams now, or have always had fire wardens, on every floor. So we need cyber wardens, and we need more of them. And we're looking to get 60,000 cyber wardens done over the next few years. So my simple feedback would be jump on the program. That will create a pathway, as well as talking about the response management. I think a serious conversation about insurance needs to be a part of the response program as well.
Yeah.
Do they get a hat?
Yes.
Maybe, who knows? Yeah, they get a
I
chocolate.
see merch in your picture.
yeah. They get a chocolate at the end. That's a COSBOA guarantee.
I'd agree completely. I'd say there's three main things. One is education. So, probably four things: educate. To basic security. I think what we've seen in the media is you can have the best security in the world and you can still be hacked. So have basic security. Really arm yourself against those opportunistic criminals. Have an incident response plan, and have a recovery plan. If you have those four things in place, then I think you're putting yourself in good stead to deal with that in the event that there is a cyber incident.
So I've got another great question here. This one's from Anne for Jane. Where a business has cybersecurity insurance cover, where do employees' personal devices, personal mobile phones that connect to business systems sit in terms of the cover?
That's a great question, and it will. So personal devices are not normally covered, but it will change. It will depend on the nature, on the different insurance policy. So, and it also depends where the attack happens. So, if the attack is, it's the definition of a cyber incident will cover the company. So the company is covered, and if the company is at the end of a cyber attack, then you will be covered. It doesn't cover an individual. There is, however, personal cyber insurance that individuals can take out.
So, yes and no. A question here for Luke. Would a small not-for-profit be eligible for the Cyber Wardens program?
Yes, 100%. No, we're certainly sector agnostic. You just have to be a small business and roll on up. And I think it's a really interesting question. I think with not-for-profits as well, COSBOA ourselves, we're a not-for-profit organisation. Sometimes you feel that pinch of you might not be as resourced as a big listed entity, or you might not, have, dare I say it, a big bold balance sheet. But certainly we're all about arming up people to give them that confidence, and particularly for not-for-profits, especially if you're dealing in the care space or the volunteer space, you're potentially dealing with some very sensitive data when it comes to the volunteer economy and the not-for-profit economy. Charities are regulated quite highly through the ACNC and other relevant regulations. So if anything, 100% welcome the not-for-profit sector to get involved with Cyber Wardens.
Now going back to the evil hackers, so say I've had a ransomware attack, what is the first step I should instigate? They've already shut down my systems. You've said people might think, oh, quick, call an IT person down the road, because generally small business owners, they are their IT department. There is no IT department. What are some step-by-step things that people should do?
First thing you do is call Jane.
Because you've got your insurance.
Similar to Luke, I'm going to be a bit facetious here and say, call the hotline if you have insurance. Look, I think if you take ransomware, it's a really interesting example as well, because there's a lot in that. Some people morally, ethically don't want to pay a ransom. Other people just want to pay the ransom and get up and running. But there's also a lot in that. You can pay the ransom and
they just take your money,
and they can sit there and they've left a little Trojan horse sitting in your system. And so you definitely, how quickly you respond and the nature of your response is critical to how severe attack will be. I can't stress it strongly enough. Have an incident response plan. I would hope insurance is part of that, so you do have a hotline that you can call. But if you choose not to take out insurance, make sure you know who you're going to call and how you're going to respond in the event that does happen.
And the response plan would ideally have, exactly as Jane said, hit the nail on the head, stakeholders. So your accountant, your BAS agent, potentially the regulator as well, your staff, your third parties, and potentially your clients. Of course, they might be inadvertently now a threat as well by extension. So certainly having a physical copy of that incident response plan is really important.
Yes, and how do you feel about extortion? Get set in your mind about that as well. Right. All right, I've got a few more audience questions. This is a last question for Luke, and it says, are there third parties that are able to provide reviews for compliance around service providers not using customer data for other purposes? or is this sort of something typically handled through indemnifications? That was a very complex question.
Look, if we're talking more broadly about getting advice and assurance around your systems, I think certainly there'll be a lot of professional services firms out there who, whether that's the big four or small and medium businesses, I have to plug the small and medium businesses, that would provide that sort of diagnosis for you. Certainly, what Cyber Wardens is sort of a miniature version of that. It's really trying to open up your thinking to these threats and really get you adopting that cyber mindset. So in terms of third parties, I'm sure there are many of them out there. You've obviously got the federal government's quite vested in this now as well. The Minister for Cybersecurity, Claire O'Neill's announced a sort of a Cyber Shields program. So it's probably worth the questioner having a bit of a look at that as well. And also in terms of third parties, telcos and banks are our partners in this too. So what's really exciting with Cyber Wardens is it's actually supported by Telstra and the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. So they've actually said, you know what, we have skin in the game here. We service small businesses, just like BizCover services small businesses. So their architecture, their systems need to be fit for purpose as well. So I think looking at that architecture that we work with more broadly, even things like your telephone, there was an anecdote I was given about a hair salon who were encouraged to use VoIP, voice over internet protocol, which sounded like a great idea, but then that actually opened them up to a potential hacking through the Wi-Fi on their phone.
Oh wow, I never thought of that.
Yeah, so it's just having that awareness of your physical assets as well, your infrastructure that you use, making sure that will be part of any sort of audit of your systems as well.
We actually paid a $30,000 claim for phreaking, which is the telephone hacking for a hairdresser.
Right,
yes.
There you go.
So I wonder if it's
maybe
the
it's
same,
the same anecdote.
person.
Yeah.
Phreaking.
Phreaking. I can't keep up with all the names, honestly.
Phishing and phreaking, I mean, it's an evolving vocabulary set.
It doesn't really sound like cybersecurity. So I've got one final question, which is about most people in the business work remotely. I've heard of times when hackers can come through a public Wi-Fi network. Is it safe to work at a cafe or library when that's free Wi-Fi?
It's a very big question. I mean,
everyone does it at some point.
Yeah. Absolutely. Remote access scams are, I don't know if they're in the top 5, but they're certainly up there. And using public Wi-Fi is one of the surefire ways to fall victim to a remote access scam. Luke mentioned multi-factor authentication earlier. Multi-factor authentication is the process that is going to help secure you and protect you from remote access scams. We live in the world we live in. I think we can have best practice that people shouldn't, but these things happen, right?
Yep.
So many of us have so much data on our mobile phone, though, included in our plans these days. So maybe just hotspot off your phone might be less vulnerable.
Yeah, and look, remote work's not going away, right? And even when you're in the hotel room, you might hook into the hotel's Wi-Fi, or at the airport as well. You often get free Wi-Fi too. So it's worth being aware of those issues.
Yeah. Should we have a VPN then?
I'm not sure.
No? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and VPN's a fantastic way to help protect yourself. Whether I personally don't know the cost of that and how accessible that is for a small business, but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you,
You've been
Seth.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today for a small business guide to cybersecurity, and thanks to our amazing guests, Luke Achterstraat, CEO of COSBOA, and Jane Mason, Head of Product, Channels and Risk at BizCover. And thanks also to BizCover for supporting us with today's event. If you want to find out more about COSBOA's Cyber Warden program, head to www.cyberwardens.com.au. And if you'd like to make sure your business is protected should the worst happen, well then get in touch with the folk at BizCover to get the lowdown on cyber liability insurance at bizcover.com.au. And of course, that's it for us. If you want to get the latest news and expert advice and tips for small business owners, well, check out our site at kochiesbusinessbuilders.com.au. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Cec Busby. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.